Hello, today we are discussing Brother Thom, and it's the second part of our interview with him, discussion with him, I should say. Or at least we set it up, we let him talk, but we also like to ask some questions. And before we show this second part, I think some people would be surprised to see what's happening on the second half of this. Um, I I liked the idea of talking about how Brother Thom teaches, how Dr. Thom Wolf teaches.
Yeah,
But I also appreciate how he just discusses what he's passionate about. And don't you agree, Jake, that uh, what makes it interesting or what makes him interesting is the passion, because passion is part of teaching. Would you agree with that?
oh, for sure. And I think we see this when he talks about culture and he talks about film and books in this episode, the second piece. And I think it's just fun to see that passion and it comes out. You go, oh, this guy is really into this, you know?
Yes, and so it's fun to listen to him. And if you haven't spent 2 or 3 hours with he has all these titles,
Dr. Tom Wolf.
Dr. Thom Wolf, uh, you're missing out. However, this is like spending 3 hours or whatever it's going to end up being, 2.5 hours with Dr. Thom Wolf. And he has you mentioned books and movies.
Mhm.
He has a movie recommendation that I think is a little bit unusual. So that's this half of the discussion, and we hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you.
In terms of, I did want to, because you mentioned Jesus, and I want to talk about
Mhm.
Jesus. Um, I was reading Sermon on the Mount this week, and there's a lot there, isn't there? After all these years, I read it, and it still impacts.
Oh yeah, he messes with your mind.
Oh, and so you did a whole, uh, you did something with us, a physical, where we had to not stand up, but we had to use our hands, but to remember who Jesus is. But what is it about him that makes him a teacher that can draw crowds?
Um,
That's hard because there's a lot.
yeah, but again, for the masses, see, his main thing is that he didn't write books and he didn't write linear essays. He told stories. And many times, see, there were times where he explained the intellectual framing and the content from that story. I'll give you an example. Go 6 chapters beyond, because the Sermon on the Mount is from chapter 5 to 7, okay, of Matthew, like the Gospel of Matthew. In chapter 13, he gives example and he says the the realm of activity, the thought category and everything, the kingdom of God is like a farmer who goes out and sows seeds. And then he deals with birds, rocks, weeds, and good soil. For some, the birds, before it almost gets to the soil, birds come, the crows, they eat it up, gone. Second category, some fall on rocks. The sun burns them, they're gone. Hard, dry up. The third category is weeds. They take root, they start growing, but weeds. Have you ever noticed that you have to plant plants, but you don't have to plant weeds? I don't know if weeds on the planet Earth. I don't know if they're so that weeds come up and choke it. It's good, but it's choked out. Fourth category, good soil. And now there's 30, 60, and 100. A person asked me one time, are you ever jealous of that leader? And I said, no. Well, what would you do in Orange County different? And what do you think he would do in East LA? And I said, well, I think if I was in Orange County, I'd do what he does, because it's pretty obvious that he's successful. And you know what? I tend to think that if he's in East LA, he'd do pretty much what I'm doing, because that's the context.
Okay.
But see, he is a 100-fold or maybe 1,000-fold man. I'm a 60. I don't overestimate him, but boy, I don't try to underestimate. I want to learn from him and such. But I'm not him. I don't have that personality. I don't work that well with so many people. And there's another man who has much less of a leadership, a following, or group that he influences. He's a 30-fold man. And I don't disrespect that man. He's different. So get a good estimate of yourself as a teacher. And there are some outstanding teachers in schools, and there are most of us around city, and then some struggle or so themselves. But you know what? Does that make you better? No, it makes you different. You're just different. So that's what I see. It can be good soil, good-hearted, good trained, good associate in teaching and such. But again, he said, if you understand this, you got the principles for everything. So everything that goes on, he says, this is it. And some are going to come through, and you know what? Their kids' lives are so scattered and everything. You as a teacher sowed good seeds, but you know what? It was like the birds, the crows, the vultures came. That kid, again, had so many problems in their life and everything.
It's so
Does that make
fascinating,
sense?
yeah, that you talked about this, because if somebody were to ask me that question, what is the kingdom of heaven or kingdom of God? I wouldn't have thought to start with a story. And he did. And it because I think he's reaching that 8-year-old boy. And he's trying to make it sticky for him. But it's such a good, powerful lesson going in. I mean, it's the end of the school year, but going into a school year to remember that Jesus was the teacher, capital T.
And you see, what's interesting is I tell this, and like you say, it may be for children, or that may be the application you make. But you see, once you tell the story, it affects you as an adult, as an educated adult, as a professional, in ways, because it's the story. Find it, and a lot of times in your see, in my notes, okay, I published a thing on. In fact, I'll mention this because this may be helpful. WV3. I created a category called WV3 and published on it and everything. That I was doing a thing on philosophies, and one of the things, like the professor of philosophy at UC Berkeley has in his writings in the 70s, he's done a classic, and it was a very clear thing. He said every philosophy has a metaphor. I never thought of that. So every philosophy evolves its own metaphor. So some will use a mechanical, an engine. Someone else will use a flower. Someone else will use an animal. But they have metaphors. And that was really fascinating to me, because you see what that is there's a picture that then explains everything, that everything is related to. Okay. With that, so my academic training in sociology with an emphasis in urban studies, and then my MA was in cross-cultural communication, taking a message that you feel is valuable in communicating. And yeah, so looking at after 9/11, I noticed a deficiency of vocabulary. Two things. The media did not have the ability to discuss religion or spirituality. They could not refer to Islamicists or Islam as a culture of military and jihad and continual warfare. They could talk about Arabs are terrorists, but they couldn't discuss Muslims. Okay, that's related to the fact that when you enter a little bit of historical sociology, when you enter the 21st century, we grew with the word worldview, but you also had world religions. By the end of the 21st century, the vacuum cleaner of sociology had sucked up religion. And when you took it out of the dirt bag, it was the Buddhist worldview, the Judeo-Christian worldview, et cetera, and all the religions had become worldviews. But Aristotle warned us, you cannot call two things by the same name, or you cannot have a rational discussion. If I have a 6-year-old and I call his little bouncing ball his bouncy, and his bouncy rolls into the street, but you're on a 2-lane big street or so, and there's a 16-wheeler truck or an 18-wheeler truck coming down. And if I have called a 18-wheeler truck, because when you ride in them, you know, it's not, the springs aren't real good, and I call that a bouncy. So if I call his little rubber ball a bouncy and the truck a bouncy, and he's in the street getting his ball, and I say, look out for the bouncy, get out of the street, the bouncy, and he picks it up and laughs, ha, 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 and he's hit by the bouncy. You cannot call two different things by the same name and have a rational discussion. I'll give you a cultural example. See, for a while, we thought that we have shifted from rational thinking basically from what I call skeptic or skeptic R to skeptic E. Skeptic R were the Greek philosophers of Aristotle, what I call the European SPA, S-P-A. I can never keep them up. Which is first? Well, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. So the European SPA, that'll cleanse your mind. Okay. So you had the rationalists. Now then, that was the first century. In the 21st century, you have skeptics E, emotion. If you feel a certain way, not that you think, if you feel a certain way, you are that way. Let me give an example. The LGBTQ community and everything. So I'm an outsider. I come back and I say, well, that's interesting. There's different viewpoints. They're not mine, but they're viewpoints well articulated and rather institutionalized. Okay, if I feel, okay, I don't know, your audience, you may have to rate this. I'm a person who was born with a penis and testicles. Now, if I feel that I'm a woman, then I'm a trans woman. And therefore I'm categorized as a woman. No. Women have vaginas. So I said, oh, you're calling women with one set of identifiers the same as women with a different set of identifiers sexually. So what I did was I said, I can't call them the same because it mixes me up. Let's see, a trans woman is a woman, or a woman who's a trans man and what is their pronouns? It was just, forgive me for my ignorance and my slowness, but I couldn't get. So what I realized, oh, I just need to carry out what Aristotle said. So I had to see, a trans woman is considered a real woman. And so she can participate in women's sports. And it's coming down now that you're having a cultural issue. And you know what the cultural issue is? It's the issue that Aristotle consulted us in. And that is that you cannot call two different things by the same name and have a rational discussion. So I created vocabulary. Oh, T-R-A-N-S, trans. I need a short word. Oh, F-A-K-E. Oh, that'll work. Oh, you're a trans woman, fake woman. Oh, and it works now. I got it. You're a fake woman. I don't ever have to touch you, do anything. Look at your span-tastic or span underwear or anything. I know what gear is there underneath your basketball uniform or whatever, or your swimming uniform or anything. I know because you're a fake woman. Now, people may want to choose other vocabulary, but I'll tell you, if all the discussions you wanted, you cannot call, or don't argue with me. I'm sorry, I do admit I've been influenced by Aristotle. So what my question is, because we need to go forward by question, what do you disagree with to Aristotle, and what would you suggest as an alternative to Aristotle's thinking? Because in that I have become Aristotelian. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So you carry forward the conversation, but here are options. You have an option, this is an option, and my influence, my position has so far actually been greatly influenced by Aristotle. What do you think of that?
This is fascinating because earlier in the discussion, you were talking about you put on your, I don't know how you put it, you walked on your pastor leg for years. Now you're walking on your academic or
Yes,
professor. So
professor.
I hear professor
Yes.
in you right here.
And you hear it, you see, because it's been developed, not this aspect, walking on this leg has not been in the 20th century when I was giving definite instructions, but now then I still make instructions, I still make statements, position, but now then I introduce them and discuss them as discussions, not debates. I ask
You
questions.
ask questions. That's
This
interesting.
person said that. That's, let me say, I became an expert in the Abraham Lincoln of India, Mahatma Phule. He was 1850, so he's in the generation of Karl Marx, Abraham Lincoln, like that. Okay. You come forward, and in the 20th century, 1950, the father of modern India was Mahatma Gandhi. Okay. He said Phule back in the 1850s was my guru. I looked to him, I modeled myself after him. The man who wrote the Constitution of India was Dr. Ambedkar. He was an untouchable. He came and got a PhD at Columbia University. He goes back. He goes back and realized, he said, I forgot that I was untouchable because he couldn't get a hotel room, even though he had a PhD from Columbia. But eventually, with enough secular people around, he became the father of the Constitution. He said, Phule is my guru. So here you have two men on opposite ends of the pole. Gandhi said, clean up the caste system, and Ambedkar said, clear out crush it. And he said, conform it and everything. So here's two men who are at loggerheads together, but they go to the same person. And so what happened is, in doing lectures, I was able, see, he said, Mahatma Phule in the 1800s dedicated a book. It's now published by the government of India. All his works are published by the government of India. He's the father of social revolution and reconstruction of India. And he's the admired person like Abraham Lincoln here. He said India will never change in its system of classifications of humans such as until it gets a new guru. And they said, well, who is your guru and who do you recommend? He said, Bali Raja. Bali, okay, that means sacrifice. And Raj, that means the king of sacrifice. Well, who is that? And what does he teach? He said, well, he was a teacher long ago in a country far away. And there he cared for the poor, he healed the sick and the blind, and he even raised the dead. But then the priest, now see, this gets you into the language of India, the Brahmin priest. The priest of that country murdered him, and then he uses the word crucified him. He's talking about Bali Raja. Okay. And he said, but the disciples of Bali Raja went everywhere. And they spread his message to like Britain. And we know how the British used to be tribal. and they painted their bodies in blue before they went into battle, and they screamed and yelled before and stomped on the ground before they had battles. But now we see them here in our country, and they're dignified and educated and civilized. And they took the message to America. And now those, he called them, those messengers of Bali Raja, those American missionaries have come here. And I discovered in India, reading Mahatma Phule, I discovered that, oh, I am a follower of Bali Raja. I was taught that by Phule. So he said, India will never change until it listens to a different voice, the voice of Bali Raja. Wow. So in writing that, I did lectures. I wrote a book. He and his wife visited Christian Baptist missionaries 100+ miles away from Pune and came back, and he became the first Indian to open a school for children. See, missionaries, foreigners had done it, Brits had done it, the Dutch had done it, the Portuguese had done it, the Americans done it, but an Indian. So they came back and established the first school for children in India. But theirs said, you teach every child. What do they mean? You teach caste and outcast together. And you teach boys and, radical, girls. Because you see, a girl has bad karma, so she has to die and come back as a male something, a male frog, a male worm, a male roach. But she has to come back male before she can ever attain salvation or moksha. So this is radical. And his wife used to wear a headdress and garment so that they would throw dung, human and dog dung at her to slap on her. And then she would take that off and hang it and then teach the children, because the leaders of the village wanted her to not teach children or teach girls. So she is the mother of modern education for India and known to be that. So in writing about her, the things that I've written there, I didn't know that they would be what would think. But now then I was doing for MBA students who used to go to New York, but their college, Williamson College, brought them here as part of their MBA work. I discovered, gosh, the works are in innumerable colleges, high schools and colleges and universities throughout India because of writing about her as a woman. See, every Indian woman in the United States, the UK, or anywhere, if you meet an Indian diaspora woman, she owes the fact that she reads to her. Why? Because when this woman was 8 years old, she was listening in the marketplace and eating, I don't know if it was a pomegranate or an avocado. She was eating, and the missionary foreigner from Britain was talking to Indian women. And there the missionary rebuked her and said, little girl, we're talking about important spiritual things you need to take, because she was smacking. And she said, you need to go away. And little Savitri, 8 years old, went away and threw away her food and came back and sat there and listened. At the end, the British woman was ashamed and went to her and said, little girl, I'm sorry that I told you to go away. You're a very sensitive girl in there. And she said, I want to give you a gift. And she gave her a Gospel of John. And the little girl took it, but she's a girl. She doesn't read. She will never be allowed to read. She took it and she put it in her dowry. When she got married, because you get married once you reach puberty and can produce children, okay? So she got married when she was 12 and he was 13, Phule was 13, had children. And when he kept telling her about these radical things about Bali Raj and everything, she said, you got to read it here. And she said, well, I don't know how to read. And it was a 13, 14-year-old. He said, I'll teach you to read. And she said, wait. And she went to her dowry and she pulled out this little Gospel of John. And she said, if I learn to read, I want to learn to read from this little booklet. And the mother of modern education for India learned to read from the Gospel of John.
That is great. That is wonderful. And what a look at, and
So
Dr.
what I
Thom
do
Wolf
is,
and Susanna Andrade.
she did her master's work at Columbia University in the School of Education at Columbia
Amazing.
in New York City. And what's interesting is that from that, what I have done moving into the 21st century is, yes, here are the statements, but to the statements of someone else. So I present accurately so that any research that they do on their own, they will see that, oh, you stated her accurately, and you've not done your job as a teacher until you can state the opposite position so that the person who is in the opposite camp says, yes, that's what I believe.
That's really
And
great
at
and
that point,
instructive.
you've disciplined yourself educationally to have a conversation of
I just want to
integrity.
underscore what you just said, though, because a lot of people watch this. A former Christian pastor has stated that in class, you have to accurately represent the other side, as well as your side or a side, to depict them properly.
Yeah, and then people say, well, you're saying this. I say, no, oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. I was speaking about the position of Mahatma Phule. What do you not like about Mahatma Phule? I've asked a question.
That's right.
They instantly answer internally, truthfully, whether or not they will ever answer truthfully externally, but we're in conversation in the global world.
Don't get me in trouble.
And we're trying to solve one problem. We have 8 zones on the planet who give different answers. And my question is, what is the best way to live life on this planet? And my answer is from an old intellectual by the name of Amos. And he's Micah, by the name of Micah. And he said, what does the Almighty, the awesome one, the great force, whatever you want, but what does I require except to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly for your God? I call them these 3. Why do I call them that? Let me ask this. That was a Hebrew prophet about 500 years before Jesus. Where did Jesus quote Micah?
I know he did, but yeah, I don't remember where.
We got 4 options. Matthew, anybody give me a Matthew? Hey, I am Mark. Anybody, John and Luke? Anybody, give me
Luke.
23:23. Say it with me. 23:23. Again, 23:23. One more time. 23:23. Matthew 23:23. And he said, you people are academics. You're doctors of the law, or would be what we would translate the Bible. You're theologians, and you're seminary professors. You're graduate school professors. And you consume yourself with counting seed because you believe that 10% goes to God. So your whole life is composed of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 are mine, and 1 is thine, oh God. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 are mine, and 1 is thine. You're tithing 10%. He said the deeper things, the deep things, the substantial things of the scriptures are justice, mercy, and integrity. Paul flips the order. Like going past something when you look in your rearview mirror and behind you is an ambulance. If you look on the hood of the ambulance, it's spelled backwards. Why? So that in the mirror, it flips and you can read ambulance behind you. Paul flips the order and he says, from the moment I heard of you, I prayed for your faith, your love, and your ability to withstand suffering, or looking for the hope of the kingdom, the real standard. God. So faith is integrity, love. He said there's faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love, touching others' life with compassion, which will then whet their appetite for more. Okay.
Well, I just want to say though, too, is that that's great that you've talked so much about India because our biggest audience is India. We have our
Interesting.
yeah, most watched videos are Bollywood videos. So you don't understand how much we appreciate that.
Oh, this is very fine. This is very fine.
Isn't that amazing how the question was on Jesus and then we ended up in India? That's good though. There's something about Jesus in
I'm
India.
telling you, it's very fine.
Going back, and I do have a fun.
Oh.
I do have a fun question.
Okay,
Come next,
can
but
you
I-
hold that? Can
Okay,
you
good.
hold that? Okay, so let me wrap this with this. After 9/11, I'm going back to that. There was no word for religion or spirituality. So I realized, because I'd had one of my graduate professors, Dr. McGavin, has said that if you want to influence or direct conversation, you must create new vocabulary. Because then when people don't like your position, they must use your vocabulary to refute you. So I realized, okay, we can talk about, we know about worldview, okay? That's your perspective. Your worldview influences your actions and your society. That's your world venue. The venue is the program, right? That's your program. That's what you see. So you have worldview, which is your perspective, and world venue, which is your practices and activities and attitudes. I said, you got to go beneath that. So I created a word called world voice. World voice, world view, world venue. World voice is the person of adoration, because every worldview comes from a world voice. The world voice is Buddha, the Sakya Muni. Muni means monk, and Sakya means the tribe that he was from, the Sakya tribe. Well, Buddhists refer to the Buddha as the Sakya Muni. So it's nice because it alliterates with all the others. So you have a world voice, a person of adoration. Muhammad, peace be upon him, I wish him no evil. Muhammad, Jesus, Brahmin gurus, etc. So you got the world voice, and that creates a worldview. Those discussing the implications of his. From those worldviews, you get world venues, you get different cultures, 8 of them around the world. Okay? Because they're all connected to, I call them geo-life zones, a geographical life zone. And in that zone, there is an admired voice, a perspective, a worldview, world voice, worldview, and a world venue. Okay. Now, how do I make that also? That's the academic. You want the street version? Roots, shoots, fruits.
Okay.
Roots, the world voice. And from the sap and the energy and the life that comes from that, you go up the trunk of the tree are the world views that uphold the world venue, the fruits of that civilization. Roots, shoots, fruits. I lectured in the sociology department, and there was a student in there who heard me. He went on to be a banker, but see, how long was it? I think it was about 4 years later. So our doorbell rings in New Delhi, and this student came in and said, you were the lecturer, and I was in Delhi. I wanted to talk to you. He had an NGO that was sponsored with the United Nations out of Spain. Okay. And he had already provided some 5,000 women with loans. And he wanted to bring together the men for me to do, he was a Hindu man. He had his leadership, and then he wanted to bring together the women. And Daisy, Sammy's mom, and Linda were there. We were talking, but I was talking to him, and he said, I'll bring the women, I bring, he used the phrase, all the women. And then he went further, and a few minutes later, he said, oh my God, I'm sorry. I have totally misspoken. He said, I'm not able to bring all 5,000. I could only bring maybe actually only 300 or 400. And I looked to Linda and Daisy. I said, well, 300 or 400, would that be okay? They go, I say, yes, that's all right. So he organized this. We went. I will say that after 2 years of conversation, this man actually made a commitment to Jesus Christ and followed him in open discipleship and everything. He changed his entire worldview. But the point is that I was doing a seminar for his leadership, a small group of 8 or 9 men. And at the end of it, because I draw a picture of, I don't know if you can see this on camera, but I mean, I've read it so many times, it looks like this. So you do roots, shoots, and fruits. And he held this up and he said, Dr. Thom, oh my God, I tell you, every farmer in India can understand this. Every farmer in India. Yeah, because I have an academic version, world voice, world view, world venue. But I also have tried to think it through to where a child or an uneducated man who's not stupid. He is not. See, we disrespect people if, well, oh, you're from, this kind of a family, so, and your parents aren't educated. No, slap yourself. Slap yourself. That man is an intelligent man. He simply didn't take the route. He's not an educated man. To be uneducated is not to be dumb or stupid. It's to be on a different track. And so when you treat the person as intelligent, he held that and said, I'm telling you, oh my God, every farmer in India can understand this.
And even
Roots,
this,
shoots, and fruits.
and even this that you just brought up to us, the drawing is a support.
Yes.
That's what we call it, right? In the educator
right.
world, is supports for your students. The drawing, because we have nothing to do with farms, right? We're brought up in East LA and Covina, and things like this is another support, which is what makes you Brother Thom, now Dr. Thom. I have a
But
fun.
do you see, it's powerful.
It is powerful. I do want to say before I get into as we close, like a fun question, because you had mentioned some things. Talk about the world changing. You had mentioned trans and that whole, and you gave an academic answer, which was good, from your framework. But are you optimistic about what's going on and in the future? I don't mean to be simplistic about it, but
could I frame it
however you want.
Am I optimistic or pessimistic? Well, my personal framing is I'm realistic.
Okay. So this is not good.
Well, what I've seen is that I find a matching of the intellectual position of the Jewish scriptures and, oh yes, well, actually the Christian scriptures also, but it's very clear in the Hebrew scriptures that the assertion is made. A person would have to answer whether or not they feel it's accurate, but that God deals in 4-decade segments. And when you come to that, you either reaffirm that or alternative routes are taken, because each one puts you in a certain direction. And in sociology, that's called corridors of crisis. And the other big thing that came in the 90s and has really gained popularity and significance, especially from scholars out of Sweden and such, this is called path dependence. That yes, Buddhist background countries make decisions that are secular and Western, but they're still path dependent on Buddhist thought. Muslim, you take Saudi Arabia and the new prince, they're doing new things, In fact, whoever thought that the Prince of Saudi Arabia would be interviewed by, it was Brett Baer of Fox News. That was really interesting. So you have Muslim countries being influenced, but they are path dependent on Islam, on Muhammad. Okay, so the United States is in a corridor of crisis, which they usually last 5 to 8 years, just say a decade. And my evaluation as a cross-cultural anthropologist, just looking at it, whether or not I like it or not, America appears to me, from the data that I see, to be in a corridor of crisis. And they seem to be reaching a maturity position in which they will reaffirm their past. And it won't be the same old past. It will be path dependent on the past. And it will be a revitalization. A book that I'm reading right now. Summary. I don't know if I.
You read books?
Yes, and the 20-year-olds are saying they're valuing books. So this one has to be Nation and Religion by Vanderveer from
I like that cover.
by Amsterdam University. This is by Princeton University Press, and they're dealing with the thing of revitalization movements in different areas and such. So either will be a revitalization, and what then is created is not the same old thing, but it is very much related to a revitalization of the original with new incorporations, or coming out of the path, out of the corridor of crisis, which is what sociologists call it. Then there's the choice of a different. And even though it's different, it cannot get away from all the influence of the things before. So it's still path dependent.
And that's path. I was going to say, because I learned that. I just learned that from it, and that would be called path dependent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very interesting.
It would be secular, and that would be locked into the world venue out of new options in the worldview. But they really just have a very hard time getting away from the world voice.
I
will tell you this. I will tell you something that really helped me with this. In 2014, Lynn and I were in the royal forest of Nepal. So we were in an Asian leadership meeting, and it's our pattern as a couple that I will look at the newspapers and everything, and she signs us in. Okay, so she negotiates the water with all the money and stuff like that. So she's there with the credit card and signing us in the hotel. We just arrived, and it's the Royal Hotel on the Royal Forest of Kathmandu, out in the forest and everything. And I pick up the newspaper, August, of the National Review or something like that. And on the front page, they have formed a committee to consult the Nepali government. And they've included Hindu, Buddhist, and Muslim leaders. They do not even mention Christian, because Christians are like 2% or something like this. So they're dealing with 98% of the leadership. And what are they addressing? They're helping the Nepali government address social issues springing from religious origins and practices, something to that effect. And it was like, oh my goodness, they're dealing with social problems that spring from, you got fruits that spring from, how do they get them? From the sap of the shoots, the worldview of religious origin. Oh, world voice. So here on the front page of the national newspaper, and since then I've used this in articles everywhere because it says and they go through. We're still talking about the fact of women and the attitude towards women, people reading and not reading, educational issues, and all of this. And I will say that the exceptional community that has unusual statistics different from the majority is that tiny little majority that has higher literacy, higher compatibilities and such as this. So it's just very interesting, but that was from the national newspaper of Nepal out of Kathmandu, which I discovered in the Royal Forest.
The Royal Forest. Very good. Now, I just have one more question, Jake, but is there
Yeah.
anything else you want to ask? before we-
This has been a good time. We might have to come back again just because I know, time is short. I know you have places to go too. And I think your dog Buddy has to come out of his hiding in a second. But I do want to, before Ruben asks the last question, I do want to thank you for joining us. And it's not only emotionally great, but it's also intellectually
Stimulating?
Stimulating, that's the word. But no, Ruben, I just want to thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, Roots shoots fruits, path dependent, Moses, Manu. There's so much Tommy's view. There's a lot I got out of it today.
Tommy's
But
take.
Tommy's take.
Tommy's take.
I just wrote Tommy, that's right. Tommy's
Tommy's
take. The
And it's only mine. Let me give you one. Can I give you one final on that? I was in Seattle and there was a discussion about world problems, and they were saying, what are the roots? What do you feel are the main factors for social and political change and everything, and economic? And so on the panel, there was, a group of different professors, and I was their guest from India, from out of country. And the students were asking, participants were asking. So everyone gives, and I'm just crying. And they said, well, tell us yours. And I said, well, mine is such a minority view. I think we've already heard from them. And they were coming to the end. They needed. So I said, no, mine's a minority view. And they said, well, no, tell us. I said, well, that's fine. And others said, no, we want to hear you. I said, well, I follow an obscure intellectual that was in a minority country, and actually it's several thousand years ago. And they said, what? And I said, yeah, well, he said that and I went ahead with it, and it said his proposal was that his teachings would experience global dissemination. And only after that would there be intergalactic transformation. And they said, what person said that? What intellectual said that? And I said, well, his name was Jesus. And the way it's usually translated is that this good news of the kingdom will be preached to all nations, and then the end will come. But what he's saying is that his intellectual positions for social and life, political and economic transformation will be globally disseminated, and everywhere it goes, it will have the same positive effects. And then when it's totally consumed, then he will return and there will be intergalactic transformation. And everyone goes,
but
got it,
Yeah,
sneaky,
very
what are
sneaky,
you doing?
very. But you know what I like about that though too is it's interesting. A lot of people don't do that, and interesting is worthwhile. And what I mean by that is a lot of people would just jump to it and say Jesus is my main focus, and they jump to it, and then half the room shuts off. But what you did, something I learned from you, you gave them a spiritual potato chip. I got that from you.
That's right.
I got that. And you drew them in.
That's right. You
And
can lead a horse to water, but you cannot make him
Right.
drink.
You're
But
not-
you can feed that little sucker salt.
But the horse
And
the horse is grateful because it's interesting.
That's
It's
right.
intriguing.
That's right.
And so it's a very
May not even agree, but it likes the way you went about doing it.
absolutely.
Like,
It's a very important.
Well, many professionals would say to me, so you're an American missionary? I go, no. I said, you know that it's illegal to be a missionary. Well, yeah. And I said, I'm here on a business visa. I deliver credits for U.S. universities. Oh, and I'd say, but I will say this, since you brought up the topic. See, they brought up the topic.
Yeah.
I said, I'm an educator, and I'm an entrepreneurial educator. I'm on a business visa with the government.
But
And I've had at least 3 visits by the police to verify my documents. Now, are you really this? But the 10,000 volume library has convinced them, and the number of people. I have a list of hotels that we fill up with students and the stores that the students. So I said, but I am not a secular American. And they go, what do you mean? I said, I'm a spiritual American. And they go, oh, what is this? And I said, well, I'm not a secular American. I do not drink liquor. I do not curse. And the third one always would capture for us as an Indian and American. I said, and if your wife or your daughter was alone with me, they would be safe. And every man knows exactly what I'm saying. So I said, I do not drink liquor. I do not curse. And if your wife or daughter were alone with me, they would be safe. And they say, oh my God. And then they said, well, what do you mean spiritual? I said, well, I follow a spiritual path. I follow the path of Jesus. And in that 30 seconds to a minute, I have positioned myself. I've not invaded them. I've not overwhelmed them. I've not tried to, I don't know, push in the, but I wait for the questions, and sometimes the suspicion is like, no, I'm here. And then for 15 years, I maintained my passport and everything because I delivered a product, and it was an educational product, and to our understanding, it was full of integrity. But I didn't do it as a secular professor or something. I have a view, and I'm willing to state that and discuss it. Is that all right?
Very good. I like it. And back to Jesus, he did that. He said the kingdom of heaven
Yeah.
is like a farmer. So the other thing,
So I'll talk to you maybe next time about seeds, deeds, and weeds.
Oh,
Anyway,
see, I'm writing this down. Seeds, deeds, and so I would just ask this last question by telling a quick anecdote. Years ago, there was a certain pastor who was moving to the Berkeley area of the state. Oh, that was you. And I was asked if I could help move some books down. And that sounds easy. Oh boy, that was an all-day event. I did not know your book collection. And a lot of us didn't know. And it was mind-blowing how many books we moved out of your office on old Brady Street down to some cars. So the question is, you had mentioned how many books you read weekly, and I can imagine yearly, but let's narrow it down. And the last question is this: 2 books you find yourself recommending often.
Oh.
And 1 movie that you can't forget, because I know you enjoy movies.
Oh, wow. You've stumped me. Well, I suppose the books for me has to be with what's the topic. So I do tend to at different things in different times. I will give you an example. Okay, because of having the 2 legs, the pastor and professor in of ministry and marketplace. People have asked me many times, well, okay, for a spiritual, pastoral, but intellectual, educated position, what commentaries? There are Bible commentaries, which are books that give comments on scripture. Okay, so people have asked many times, what do you recommend? And I have always recommended William Barclay. William Barclay was professor of New Testament theology and studies, something like that, at Glasgow University. One of the 2, you have University of Edinburgh and University of Glasgow, East Coast, West Coast. And so he was, I would be classified as an evangelical. He was a liberal, so he was to the left of me and everything. What my position is, I can't always figure out what the Bible says, but if I ever figure out what the Bible says and means, that's my position. So that's an evangelical. So, okay, that's why you do study, because I don't know what that says. But if I ever figured out, that's my position. So I'm an evangelical. Well, over the years, he actually began to move towards that. But he wrote a set of commentaries, and they were originally for the Scottish, I think, monthly or something like that, weekly newspaper. So they were short and everything, but he's an academic, right? So he's got about a 14 or so volume thing on the New Testament. That's what I would recommend. My father only went to the 10th grade. He was a son of a German immigrant, second generation, and he used to always say I were and we was, and he messed up the English language and everything like this. But it doesn't. He came to me when I was 27 years old, and he always called me Thomas, because my mother said that's what I named you. That's what you're going to be. So it wasn't Tom. And he said, Thomas, you're a leader here and everything, and I'm teaching middle school boys. What would you recommend as a commentary? I've heard you talk about them, but I've never went. And just almost without hesitation, I said, well, William Barclay. Now, see, I didn't recommend him a person who totally agreed with me. But what I said was, Dad, here's how you read it. I said, you're going to enjoy this, because a man gives great, he will explain it as a professor, but he's really like down to earth. And he's got good illustrations, stuff like this. And you can understand it. But I said, you got to understand this, that he doesn't really believe all the Bible. So I said, here's what you do. You know that, and my dad said, you read a lot, Tom. You've done this since you were, 14 years old. Why, so you tell me what to buy. So I told him, I said, Dad, you know that I read a lot and stuff like that. He said, yeah. So I said, here's what you do. Any man or woman that you read, you call them by the affectionate name that their mother called them. So Dr. William Barclay was called Billy. Billy Barclay. So you get this volume, and then when he says that Jesus did not walk on water, but he was probably standing so far back, and Jesus was walking along the beach right near the water, so from his distance it looked like he was walking on the water. I said, well, that's really interesting. So just say, okay, that's Billy's position. But there's also Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Or if you want to call them Matt, Luke, Mark, and Johnny. And I've just found out that I hang around with those guys a lot. And you have to choose. Do you want to accept the opinion of Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, or Billy? After that, you can read anything you want to. And this man took it, used it for, I don't know how many, 20, 30 years, and died. Buried in a nowhere cemetery in Arkansas, in the hills of Arkansas. Used to put junior high and high school students, that's what they call them then, junior high and middle school, and they would, with all the other cars, slowly drive. They would drag the streets of Mena, which was, I think, 13 or 14 miles away, on the weekends, and they would wave to their friends and everything. He was loved by students. But he gave my mom, presented me a year or so later, she cleaned out things. She presented me with his volumes, and they're upstairs. And Sammy, who's our son, the 15, he has used on the Sermon on the Mount, the Barclay commentary that was my father's. And I told Sammy, you're going to read things here, and you're going to like, wow, that's not what the Bible says. And he says it's not true. He says it's not true. So listen to Billy. And you hang out with some guys, I know you do, with Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And so you got to make a decision. I can't impose that on you. You make a decision who you're going to listen to. And from that's why, do you remember a man named John Aguilar? You know John
yeah.
Aguilar? So we had students from the graduate schools, and one came one time working on doctorate at Fuller. I don't know if it's intercultural school or maybe the theology, but we would have them during a Spare Not conference, a global conference, and they would spend that Sunday afternoon with families in our congregation. And someone was at John Aguilar's house. And so then we had feedback with those students later. And in the thing, he said, I don't, this thing has blown me away. He said, I was with the Aguilars, and he had like a 3-volume of a New Testament encyclopedia. And he said, I don't even have those yet. I go to the library to get those. And he said he had this, he had Barclay, he had this and that, and he had evangelical writings, and he had liberal. And he said, I was blown away. And this man was like really dedicated. He didn't seem to be confused at all. And he said, how do you do that? And I went back to this very thing. And John, he was in the warehouse at Sears Roebuck right at the boundary of LA and East LA.
I know that.
And I just told him, I said, he came to Jesus, and he liked to read. So here's something that's well stated, but sometimes it'll push you, but it's not airy and everything. These are good, solid works. And sometimes you run across things you don't agree with. Well, who are you going to listen to? I hang out with a guy one told me that the Bible was crap. He was a PhD in physics from University of Toronto. He's Canadian. He's standing there doing chain smoking. Okay, he chain smoking, and his name was Frank. And he said to me, "Well, he said, I don't, I believe all this." He was crap, and he was both academic and pretty rough with his language. So I said, "Well, I thought you didn't believe the Bible." He goes, "I don't." I said, "Well, yeah, you do." He said, "No, I don't." I said, "Well, sure, you're quoting the Bible. I didn't know you knew enough of the Bible to quote." He goes, and he cussed. "Well, I don't believe that." And I said, "Well, yeah, don't you remember what you're quoting?" He goes, "No." I said, so we opened up the Bible. I said, "Can I show you?" Let's go forward by question. He said, "Yes, I got his permission." See, don't talk to people with a contrarian view unless you get their permission. That's why when the horse is thirsty now, but if the horse is not thirsty, he'll kick you. He'll kick you in the teeth. Right? So I read the passage. I said, it says that those who are perishing feel that the good news of Jesus is foolishness. It's stupid. It's dumb. It's nonsensical. And that's your position. So what the hell? I don't care. I said, well, Frank, I have to choose between you and the Apostle Paul and Peter, Jesus. And if I really have to choose in my intellectual life, I'm going to choose Paul and Jesus rather than Frank. And he says, yeah, I see what you're saying. So we never talked after that. And I told him, I said, "You're smarter than me. You have a PhD in physics. I don't have a doctorate degree. You're smarter than me. You're more wealthy than me, everything. But if I have to choose on opinions, I'm going to go with Paul and not with Frank." Does that say? So in life, you can't agree with everyone. I hope I can be friends with everyone and hope to be a contribution to their life.
I am fascinated that this started with 2 book recommendations and it ended with the chain smoking physics professor.
So my book is for
Barclay's commentary.
Okay, that would be the one that I can think of. That's a fairly broad base.
Got it.
For movies, I don't have just one. I have 2 or 3. But so 2016, I think it was, or 2014, something like that. There was Hacksaw Ridge.
I believe that's the title. Yeah.
Was at Hacksaw Ridge. And I had been doing my PhD in the College of Education in the School of Global Leadership. So I have a PhD in global leadership. But Andrews University is the mother university with the that a minority group, the Seventh-day Adventists, and they have lots of medical involvements all over the world. Outstanding on that. And this man in the movie was Seventh-day Adventist, and they are pacifist. So he wanted to defend his country and help protect his country during World War II, but he didn't want to be in the army to shoot and to kill people. So it shows his life of opposition and such, but it shows him as a not non-violent, what do you call it? Conscientious. It's a story of him with award-winning photography and story plot and everything. And I was fascinated by it. And I had a special interest, though I was living in India, I had a special interest in that from just kind of like connections. And to see it, that was amazing. The other thing was, locally, we used to live in the city here in California called Montebello, right next to East Los Angeles, where we worked. But we went to the movie theater there and we saw
Matrix.
The Matrix. When we came out in the lobby from that movie, I told Linda, this will receive an Academy, and this is a significant movie. Well, only later did I realize, because I studied, I wanted to know the men that wrote it, the two brothers and everything that originally gave the manuscript.
The Wachowski brothers.
Yes. And they said, and I believe it was an article in Time magazine, that see, they were influenced. One of the things their influence was the life of Jesus. And do you realize that who was the star? Who was
Keanu Reeves.
Okay, but what was his name in the?
Was it not Neo? But
Yeah, Neo. Okay, Neo. She said, I believe that you're the one and you are the one. Okay, that's Neo, right. The new one, see, the coming one. And in there, you may remember that Neo was shot dead and died.
Yeah.
Okay, how did he come back alive?
Oh.
By the kiss of the Trinity.
Trinity.
In another world.
That's funny.
And then he came back to the hallway and moved towards, you see, the opposition, but he walked right through him because the delusions were removed from his eyes. So it's a very thing. And I have, in my experience as a professional, when you ask about that movie, I have had conversations in airports from Vienna to Frankfurt to London to Moscow to Kabul to Dubai. I have had conversations with people about that movie, and I have had about 5 people that I know have made commitments of their lives to the direction of Jesus Christ from explaining it from that movie, because they took the story plot of Jesus. Do you remember that when he got in the car, when she opened the door, they were looking for him at the beginning of the movie, they opened the door and he looked, and behind him, there was a construction going on the street, but those constructions were shaped like crosses. Mm-hmm. What was the real story behind him was the cross. And he gets inside the car and begins to travel with the Trinity. I mean, the parallels to this are astounding. And Mel Gibson, then I learned, I didn't know this before, was a part of an old Catholic community that his father built a cathedral on their farm in Australia, which is an old Catholic, because they resisted the modern things of the Pope and such as this. So they were old Catholic and everything. So there's Catholic background, the Jewish brothers who taught this, who read the life of Jesus and wrote their stories with a shadow. It's the story of Jesus who was brought back to life. Neo, the promised one, The promised one was brought back to life by the kiss of the Trinity in the other world.
I did not have Brother Tom's analysis of the Matrix on my bingo card today. This is
No, and you know what?
great.
The others were like, so here's my movie review, if you'd like a review. Matrix, yes. I don't even remember the names of the others. The second one, no. The second one, whatever.
Yeah.
And the third one, no.
Yeah.
So yes, whatever, and
Yeah,
no.
they weren't very good.
Don't waste it. So it was the Matrix. Okay.
In fact, I think there was a fourth one. So
And the other movie, the third one, is the Passion of Christ. And that was such an anticipated movie. And I happened to be on a consulting assignment in Istanbul. And what's interesting in the Middle East, if I recall correctly from what I believe it was premiered in Cairo, but the newspapers were alive with the chatter. It was almost like electric. You could feel it. So I'm in Istanbul, right? I'm having some of my first taste of Turkish coffee in Turkey. And baby, it's my kind of caffeine. Wham! So we're in Istanbul, and it comes to the news media that at the point of his suffering and being beaten and the crucifixion, that the theaters, this was reported by Muslim news media in Istanbul, that there was weeping in the theaters. And as it moved through, there was weeping in theaters of the Middle East because they saw for the first time what the Injil. And see, the Injil is a holy book. The Gospels are a holy book. What we call what Christians, those of Judeo-Christian background, what we call the New Testament is the Injil. And so that's a holy book. We both affirm Genesis. Muslims and Christians and Jews affirm Genesis, but Muslims affirm the Injil. So as the Injil, for the first time, they get a visual communication, and there was weeping in Cairo. So I remember that from Istanbul.
wow. Dr. Thom Wolf, this has been a rich discussion. And I want to thank you.
It's been very enjoyable to me.
I want to thank you for joining us because this is a highlight in our, 3 years we've been doing this. So we deeply thank you for this time.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Right.